A very interesting story has come out today about Sergei Lavrov, and one should never underestimate this man. He is the voice of modern Russia, far more so, actually, I think, than Putin. Uh, the what he said, something a sentence that should never have been uttered in 2025. Russia has no interest in peace, not even in the pretense of diplomacy. The mask is cracked and has been cast aside altogether by Sergei Lavrov. Now, whether the rest of Russia, whether the rest of the Kremlin follow suit and conform to that statement, but yesterday, or actually the day before, on the 21st, Lavrov dispensed with the usual Kremlin choreography and said with remarkable candour, "We don't want this anymore. A ceasefire, a peace deal, negotiations, no. Moscow prefers war, not because it must, but because it believes it's winning." And Lavrov's dismissal of the latest American ceasefire proposal, the 30-day truce backed by Kyiv and virtually every Western capital, was telling Russia will not stop. It doesn't want to stop. This isn't merely about root causes, as Lavrov would have it. It's about imperial ambition dressed up as security anxiety, and Putin rejected even the optics of peace. He's refused a face-to-face meeting with Zelensky in Istanbul. He sent a low-level delegation instead. Medinsky, that dependable courtier, the man more suited to revising history textbooks than drafting peace treaties. The Kremlin ceasefire on May the 8th, imposed unilaterally to salvage his own Victory Day parade, so that cheap Cypriot MEPs will be safe, and fit so, of course. There's madness here. There's madness when Russia chooses to stop bombing. The killing stops, and that, of course, is exactly what the Kremlin ceasefire has demonstrated. Civilian deaths plummet when Moscow stops bombing. When Moscow proposes and enforces its own ceasefire. The war could end tomorrow if Moscow so wished. It doesn't wish. In Brussels, in Ottawa, Washington and beyond, the brutal clarity has provoked a measured but firm response. On May the 22nd, the group of 7, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK and the United States, with the EU in tow, have announced a new unity of purpose. Russian sovereign assets frozen since 2022 will remain frozen until the war ends and reparations are paid. Let's repeat that one. Until the war ends and Russia pays. This is not just a slap on the wrist. It's an economic containment in action, locking Moscow out of access to billions. A move designed not only to weaken Putin's financial flexibility, but also to fund Ukraine's staggering reconstruction bill projected at over $500 billion. The G7 has also made it clear that companies from Russia, or those who have sustained the Kremlin's war machine, will not be allowed to profit from rebuilding what their bombs have reduced to rubble. So, where is the United States in all this? The answer is complicated and deeply unsatisfying. President Trump, having once styled himself as the world's great deal maker, has been left embarrassed and inert. And after weeks of dangling ceasefire hopes in private diplomacy, like a sort of flirtatious and rather hopeless putana, Trump phoned Putin on May the 19th, and rather than commitment, he received contempt, 2 hours of contempt. The Kremlin won't end the war because it believes it can still win. And one might imagine Trump would respond with fury or resolve. Instead, he shrugs. America's sanctions remain limp, its rhetoric neutered, its commander-in-chief curiously unfazed, and European leaders, according to Axios, were surprised by Trump's contentment with Putin's rebuff. Surprised, perhaps because they've not been paying attention. Trump is not a man of consistency unless we count consistency in failing Ukraine. Ukraine fights for survival, Russia fights for power. There is no equivalence. Even Ukraine's drone strikes into Russian territory are not acts of conquest, but desperate measures aimed at dismantling the war machine that threatens its existence. April 2025 was one of the deadliest months for Ukrainian civilians since the invasion began, and still Ukraine resists, still it hopes, still it clings to Western promises. But hope, as they say, is not a strategy, and so it falls to the G7 and to principled Americans in Congress to ensure that sanctions bite, and that aid flows, and that truth is spoken. The Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025, spearheaded by Senator Lindsey Graham, must become law, not because it's symbolic, but because it's necessary. Russia has made its position clear. It doesn't want peace. Ukraine has no choice but to fight. And the rest of the world has every responsibility to demand peace, to pursue peace, whatever Russia says, whatever Sergei Lavrov says, because he doesn't speak for Russia. He speaks for one small group that is locked into the Kremlin and that follows an icicle in a Smeg fridge. The G7 has begun to show its teeth. Now, for the rest of us, legislators, diplomats, citizens, interested individuals, people on YouTube, we need to match the rhetoric with resolve. And this war ends when Russia chooses to end it, or when the world compels Russia to do so. So I hope, for Ukraine's sake and for our own integrity, that we don't have to wait too long.